So welcome to the Summer Fruit Industry webinar today. It's in replacement of the fact that we normally do a stone fruit research roadshow and go to major growing regions around Victoria and in South Australia. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So we have two webinar events. So today there's a focus on production and ag tech research. And just to highlight next week as well, there's some supply chain innovation research coming from a service supply chain project. And that's a fairly interesting one for export. So I suggest join us next week as well. The industry funding is matched by the Victorian government, the Australian government and your industry funds, Horticulture Innovation Australia. Now, our speakers for today. So we have Trevor Ranford, who's our CEO for Summer Fruit Australia. He'll provide us with some summer fruit industry updates. We have Dr. Mark O'Connell from Agriculture Victoria, and he'll be talking about results from the stone fruit project on rootstocks for peach and nectarine. Mark will also provide a brief overview of the ag tech research for the Food Agility CRC project that's been run at the Agriculture Victoria Smart Farm in Tatura. Then we have Dr. Daniel Pelliccia from Rubens Technologies. He'll be discussing the new handheld sensor. It's capable of measuring fruit maturity, fruit quality on fruit trees in the orchard. And then we finish off with Dr. Steve Shedding from Green Atlas, who'll discuss the mobile platform that can map fruit number, size, colour and canopy size, providing producers with an enormous amount of information quickly to determine orchard needs to improve fruit quality and quantity outcomes. Just to let you know, all presentations are being recorded and will be made available on the HIN website, which I'll talk about that website at the end of the presentations. And the links will be provided from these presentations via the newsletters that you might have already seen. And we'll make our way to the main event and introduce Trevor Ranford, our CEO from Summer Fruit Australia.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Mark, for putting this event on. Apologies that it's not a physical roadshow, but that's outside of our control at this point in time. I won't spend a lot of time. I think it's more important for growers to hear the research work, but so I'll skip through some of this relatively quickly. So Summer Fruit Australia is the peak industry body for the stone fruit industry, and it is obviously manages the levy process and those R&D funds that go into hort innovation, matched by Australian government money, and this project and a number of other projects are funded in that fashion. The SAL board currently are those people listed there. We will be having an annual general meeting coming up in the next few weeks, and certainly Mick Young is retiring from the board. And there will be some new names or another new name that will go onto the board coming forward. From the point of view of a quick update, obviously communications, involvement with R&D and marketing activities, market access, market maintenance, managing the export registration, then a range of numerous projects which I'll touch on near the end. We conducted an industry R&D showcase in May at Tatura, which again was restricted somewhat by the aspects of COVID. And more recently, we have appointed a new trade development manager, a lady by the name of Olivia Tate, and she was about 5 weeks into that particular role. From a quick overview, these figures and these graphs come out of the Hort Innovation Statistic Handbook, so it gives you a idea of the moving trends, particularly within production and the overall value of the industry. So Again, if people want more detail, they can access the statistical handbook from Hort Innovation, or they can contact me. From the point of view of exports, I think 2018-19 was a record export year for the industry. Obviously, we've gone through COVID situations over the last 2 seasons effectively, but this year we were still able to export nearly 21,000 tonnes. The dollar value of that 92 million, and the unit value as estimated from the reports prepared was $4.39 a kilo, and this was considered a record for the industry. China, even with the issues of COVID and the political uncertainties, was our lead market for nectarines, peaches and plums, and the Middle East for apricots. And as you can see, the split there, obviously from those figures, nectarines and plums are certainly the major components of export. By state, Victoria is obviously still the largest state with 88% of production and export, and across Victoria and New South Wales, a total of 96%. And the export over a 10-year period has consistently increased, even though it dipped somewhat in this last 12 months, mainly due to the impact of COVID and the lack of air freight availability. This is a graph. It's part of a annual export report that's produced, and as you can see there, 2018-19 was a record year. It dropped slightly in 1920, again because the aspects of COVID and other issues, and then again a slight dip in 2021, but still the last 3 years have been the best 3 years of export for the Australian stone fruit industry. Even with the political unrest between Australia and China last year, 54% of production or export went to China, another 8% to Hong Kong, and one would believe some of that going into Hong Kong probably also went into China. So between Hong Kong and China, you're over 60% of exports. The challenge is how we maintain that and also grow the other export countries. And that just gives you another overview of each of the markets. And as you can see, China and Hong Kong were up. We had a decline in some of the other smaller markets like Canada, Saudi Arabia, and in Indonesia, but an increase in markets like India and the UAE, Singapore. So again, we're seeing growers go to specific markets where they can. From the point of view of market access, it gives this table gives you a brief overview. I suppose the bottom line is that we still do not have market access for Japan, New Zealand, South Korea, the US and Vietnam. Our expectation is that Vietnam is very close. A lot of work's been done by the department and the industry, and unfortunately COVID hasn't allowed for travel, either for us to travel to Vietnam or the Vietnamese authorities to travel here to Australia. So we're reliant on people on the ground in Vietnam to drive the process. And the United States, our belief is now that citrus has gained variations to their access, that stone fruit will go up the pecking order in relation to the US. Some of the industry challenges, I'm not going to go into all of those, but water, labour, the aspects of labour were a problem last year. They will be an increasing problem this year, and people will have seen that the government has announced an agricultural visa due to start the end of September, but whether that will get people in to Australia for this season will depend on the process. Fruit fly has been a major issue. I'm in South Australia, and it's been a major issue with outbreaks of Mediterranean fruit fly and Q fly as well. So, certainly Victoria has suffered with increased outbreaks. Market access and market maintenance is our highest priority and continues to be that, and that's why Olivia Tate has been employed to give us those additional resources to work in that particular area. Research, development, extensions are an important part of the industry, and this webinar today is very much about R&D and the extension process that goes with it. And freight has been one of our other major issues over the last 12 months, and will continue to be this year. The lack of aeroplanes coming into Australia, and therefore limited planes going out. Certainly the support by the Australian government with IFAM has been an integral to that, but that's due to, at this point in time, due to finish at the end of September, but we're hopeful that the government will extend that program. And we have issues with sea in available containers and available ships. So 2020-21 was probably a perfect storm with all of the particular issues we were dealing with. From the point of view of research and development, just covering off on a number of things. Obviously, this project or this webinar is about the experimental stone fruit orchard. We had a trade and market access project which is completed. We've got a new one in place. And then there are a range of other projects listed there. Many of them are funded from additional sources outside of the stone fruit levy, and I think that's been a valuable tool. And again, the one in relation to the food agility, both Daniel and Steve will talk on their components of that particular project. So that's a quick overview of where the industry's at. If people want more information, my details are there.
I'm Mark O'Connell, based at Tatura Smart Farm in Victoria, and today I'll present some experimental findings on project SF17006, which is the experimental stone fruit orchard. And the topic of today will be rootstocks on peach and nectarine. I acknowledge the Summer Fruit Industry Fund, Fruit Innovation. A quick background, we've just heard from Trevor that exports are increasing, particularly Asia, Middle East. We also know in the industry that the quality and the variability in fruit quality does impact our sales and consumer preferences. The industry has a whole diversity of orchard systems and canopy designs, everything from the low density traditional vase type freestanding trees right through to the modern high density two-dimensional trellis type orchards. Orchards are coming into production at the moment. And worldwide, in terms of rootstocks, breeding programs in stone fruit, there's very few of those compared to other tree crops like apple, for example. In Australia, Nemegard's the main industry standard rootstock, and that's particularly pertinent to peach and nectarine. And overall, in Australia, we have limited data on rootstocks in stone fruit, and information on tree survival, the growth and development, etc., the yield, fruit number, fruit size, components, and the fruit quality aspects. So obviously rootstocks and the rootstock selection is a long-term strategy that needs to be decided before crop establishment. The vigor component of a rootstock is a very important for orchard management. It governs tree performance, it governs production potential, yield, and fruit quality outcomes. And the main agronomic characteristics, as we list there, are tree survival and health of the tree, the vigor, the precocity, how early we can get into production, the adaptable to the soils, the climate, and to tolerance and resistance to stress, whether that's water stress, salinity, nematodes, pests and diseases, etc. Overall, rootstocks and systems provide important functions, and they are access to water and nutrients, a barrier to soil stress, and a conduit for signals of plant growth and function. So what we'd expect to see if we have a dwarfing rootstock, what sort of behaviour in the sign, in the top of the part of the tree, the sign? Well, it's decreased growth, and that comes around through decreased crown and canopy size. You see that in trunk size, reduced shoot growth, reduced water shoots. You also get changes in tree architecture, more greater branching angles. You get more shoots that are short and spurs, and we also changes in the flowering and behaviour there as well, with increased flowering and fruit set. So there are currently a number of mechanisms and theories out there that explain this behaviour in reduced tree size due to dwarfing rootstocks. And the 3 or 4 main theories are carbon or nutrient exchange, the hormonal or metabolic signalling theory, or the water relations theory. Worldwide, there is no consensus, not one consensus overall in all the work that's been done around the world on apples and other tree crops as well. Quickly, carbohydrate theory and nutrition theory suggests that there's a reduced available of carbon and carbohydrates from the root system, and that reserves, it limits what happens in spring, and the main outcome is decreased growth in the tree. The hormone signaling theory, similar sort of story. Everything leads to this reduced growth, but basically ABA and cyanocyanins and gibberellin synthesis are all decreased, root growth's decreased, and that leads to change in tree behaviour, tree size. The water relations theory is, again, another one, whether it's through the graph union or not. There's reduced water uptake and flux, changes in what they call hydraulic conductance, leads to mild water stress, changes at photosynthesis and or reduced tree growth. That's enough on the theory. So our work at Tatura, it basically is looking at dwarf, semi-dwarf and vigorous rootstocks, and looking at how they impact tree size, how the rootstock affects yield and fruit quality, and the hypothesis is that the reduced growth and changing the production potential. So we've set up 2 carefully designed field experiments, and we're basically keeping everything else constant: water management, nutrition, pest and disease management, soil type, everything else except for the crop that we're growing, that's either peach or nectarine, and the rootstock treatment, which is the genetics. That's an overview of the experimental site at Tatura. And the 2 crops and cultivars are peach and nectarine. The block of peach here and the block of nectarine on a Shep fine sandy loam, planted in 2013. Vase canopy, 4 litres per canopy, 2 metre tree spacing, 4.5 metre row spacing. And then after the 3rd leaf, we have been growing these trees and measuring things for the last 5 years. We're focused on the vegetation and yield and fruit quality parameters. So the focus is looking at these dwarf, semi-dwarf and or vigorous stocks on tree survival, tree growth, tree development, fruit yield and fruit quality. The rootstocks are Nemigard, Cornerstone, Alberta, Crimps 1, Crimps 86 and Catamount. Here's a snapshot of the trees in dormancy this winter, and you can see, as I mentioned earlier, Nemigard's our control, our industry standard, and we can see tree size here and structure, and we can see a lot of suckers occurring on Crimps 1 and also a reduced tree size. So this is what we knew prior to the work. This is the evidence available at the time, back in 2013, 2012, when the study first started. So Nemigard, a very common vigorous rootstock used in sandy soils. Alberta, typically used in heavier soils. Crimps 86, another new rootstock, considered vigorous. drought tolerant, high pH tolerant, and wet soil potentially tolerant. Catamin, another new rootstock, alternative to GF677, prefers well-drained sandy soils. Cornerstone, another new rootstock, high vigour, disease resistance in nematodes and crown gall. Crimps 1, another new rootstock, cold and drought tolerant and water tolerant, waterlogging tolerant. So here's a tree size graph schematic and showing from 0 to 100%. And we're comparing, we've got some here that we've captured in our study, Crimps 86, Nemegard, Catamin, and down here, Crimps 1. So that suggests to me that Crimps 1 should be dwarfing, and we should have high vigour in Crimps 86, Nemegard and Catamin. What we don't have information on is the Cornerstone and Alberta. Overall, what are we going to expect? We're going to expect less vegetative growth in a dwarfing rootstock, reduced pruning biomass, that should occur. We'd expect less internal shading, that should lead to improved shoot quality and increased flower bud development. So it's a basic quick snapshot of some of our experimental designs and methods and approaches. And we're looking at phenology, light interception, trunk size, for example, pruning, tree survival and health, yield and fruit quality. And as we're doing today, webinars and presentations. At harvest time, measuring fruit number, fruit weight, and internal and external fruit quality parameters. We've got a inline grader here with sensors. We have published on the websites on the HIN throughout the years each experimental treatment, each rootstock, and a time series during the growth cycle each year. So there's a movie here, for example, on the nectarine, and there's one on peach available on the website. So what we've found, well, when we look at tree performance and when we look at fruit behaviour, all the things we've measured, whether that's tree survival, phenology, the pruning weights, tree size, light interception, branch diameter, etc., shoot growth. At harvest, we're measuring leaf nitrogen with the SPAD meter, for example, and suckering. And at harvest time, we're measuring yield, fruit quality. Everything we've measured, we're finding significant differences between rootstocks. As an example, last season, 2020-21, in nectarine and in the peach, for the 5 rootstocks under each crop, we are getting differences due to rootstock. So in nectarine, for example, we're getting reduced tree size, less light interception under the dwarfing rootstock Crimps 1. We had no differences in other tree rootstock treatments in the nectarine. Everything was similar to Nemegard in this season. In the most current season, 2021, again, we measured light interception in the late season peach under the 5 different rootstocks. Compared to Nemegard, we can see a slight reduction there in tree size under Crimps 86. What's been happening with pruning biomass over the last 5 winters and summers? So here's the cumulative pruning biomass, that's winter and summer pruning for the first leaf, that's year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, and year 7 for Rose Bright and for September Sun. And basically, we're not getting much difference in pruning biomass other than the dwarfing rootstock having a large reduced amount of pruning material, being a smaller tree in Crimps 1. When we look at peach, we're comparing Nemegard, Catamin, Cornerstone, Alberta, and Crimps 86. Over time, there looks to be a drop off in the Crimps 86 biomass pruning weight over time. In terms of yield, what are we seeing? Well, this is the cumulative yield in fresh weight kilograms per tree in seasons 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 under nectarine, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 under peach for each rootstock. And as you can see, there's an order here, and that's the same order we can see in the graph, in the data. And we can see Cornerstone is basically out yielding most rootstocks especially compared to our industry standard Nemigard, and Crimps 1, obviously being the smaller dwarfing trees, have low yield outcomes. In peach, the late season peach, we've got Cornerstone again on the top of the rankings, and a very close second, third sort of ranking for Catamount and Nemigard and Alberta, and then the least yielding crop and rootstock is the Crimps 86 under peach. What's happening to fruit quality and fruit weight and fruit sweetness? So this is a 5-year summary for averages for Rose Bright Nectarine. So compared to Nemigard, and fruit weight is in blue, the blue bars. So compared to Nemigard, over a 5-year period, the 5 years of the study so far, fruit size is increased under Cornerstone on the Rose Bright trees. When we look at fruit sweetness compared to Nemigard, our industry standard, we're getting big, significant increases in fruit bricks under Crimps 1, the dwarfing rootstock. What's happening? What's the picture look like for September Sun? We have Nemigard fruit size. There's getting bigger fruit on Alberta. We're getting bigger fruit on Cornerstone, and we're getting bigger fruit on Catamount over a 5-year average. In terms of fruit sweetness, there's not a lot of statistical differences in fruit sweetness among the 5 rootstocks in peach. Another way we're looking at the data is looking at the distributions of all the fruit that we measure across the rootstock treatments. And what we're wondering is whether we can see a shift to the right of the curve. That means we're getting a higher mean value, but the same sort of variation, the same sort of uniform. We might also argue that we might get a more uniform outcome, but at the same mean value, or we get the best of both worlds, where we're shifting the profile of quality and we're getting a higher mean value and more uniform. So here's some data for the first season of Nectarine Rose Bright under the 4 rootstocks in that year. Nemigard is the purple line here, Cornerstone and Crimps 86 do look like there's a shift to the right in fruit size. So there's a huge range in fruit size outcomes here, but the distribution of fruit and the fruit size is suggesting that we're getting in that season a shift. When we look at in that same season for Rose Bright on the fruit sweetness bricks, we're getting no significant differences between the profiles, the distributions under different rootstocks. Here's a summary from last season. Rose Bright under the 5 rootstocks: Cornerstone, Alberta, Crimps 1 and Crimps 86 in Nemigard. And we can see in fruit number per tree, we're getting the smaller trees, the Crimps 1 trees don't have the capacity to carry large fruit number, hence the yields are low, fruit numbers low. However, their fruit weights in this season was maintained very similar or statistically similar to the Nemigard. However, they were sweeter fruit, but more firmer fruit, so less mature, but they had a higher percentage red skin colour. So they were sweeter fruit, more red fruit, but not as the yields were down. So in summary, what have we found for tree growth metrics? We found in the Nectarine, the Crimps 1 showed dwarfing traits. We saw that in reduced tree size and vegetative growth, whether that was everything from pruning biomass, main branch size, light interception, shoot length. We did see excessive levels of suckers under Crimps 1, and we continue to see that. We did have some suckering on Crimps 86 as well. It was greater than the standard Nemigard. Crimps 86 also showed some semi-dwarfing traits. in the light interception data across many years. Alberta and Cornerstone had similar growth and development compared to Nimega. We've got a summary here for peach, where tree survival in the establishment years was lowest under CRIMS 86 and Catamount. CRIMS 86 did show semi-dwarfing traits. There was some suckering in CRIMS 86. The other three, Alberta, Cornerstone and Catamount, had similar tree growth and development. In terms of yield and fruit quality, the main messages are Cornerstone increased average fruit weight and skin colour compared to Nemegard. CRIMS 1 produced low yields, good fruit size and sweetness, and improved colour. Yield and quality under Alberta CRIMS 86 were similar to Nemegard. For peach, Cornerstone and Alberta increased fruit weight and red skin coverage. CRIMS 86 produced similar yield, fruit weight and bricks, however did have increased red skin coverage. Yield and quality under Catamount was similar to Nemegard. As I've covered that off earlier, so the main conclusions is that we examined our peach and nectarines using dwarf, semi-dwarf and high vigour stocks and found that we did induce vigour effects on tree growth, tree development, yield and fruit quality. In summary, Cornerstone, high vigour, large sweet fruit and high yield. In summary, CRIMS 86, semi-dwarfing, and CRIMS 1, low yield, dwarfing and excessive suckering. Further information, we can refer you to the latest issue of the Australian Tree Crop Magazine, also posted on the HIN. We've developed production protocols and grower information. They're on the HIN. We've got published scientific literature and summary tables of yield and quality for each experiment on the HIN. You can contact me directly or ResearchGate, and I acknowledge the funding body and the project team members. Okay, I'm again Mark O'Connell here, and today a pleasure to present a quick overview of the Food Agility CRC project, which is based in looking at sensors for summer fruit. It's a 2-year research project, and we have a quite ambitious project looking at real-time sensing technologies that will assist growers and exporters to improve their export quality outcomes. It helps us decide on when to pick, orchard management decisions, estimating yield, and looking at fruit quality throughout the value chain. I've got the 4 sensors being investigated there, pictures down the bottom. So they are the spectrometer, the colorimeter, the cartographer, and the biostatic LiDAR. We are involving industry partners, and we'll hear from Rubens and Green Atlas today. So the fluorescence reflectance spectrometer from Rubens Technologies is examining firmness, maturity, sweetness, and internal disorders. The colorimeter, is a Rubens Technology sensor as well. We're looking at colour of fruit skin. The cartographer is a mobile sensing platform, Green Atlas, again looking at fruit number, fruit size, yield and quality, and fruit colour. And the biostatic LiDAR out of MIT University is looking at fruit maturity and tree photosynthesis. So the work we're doing is to develop these sensors, calibrate these sensors, validate these sensors, and evaluate these sensors. And we're using the facilities on the Tatura Smart Farm, laboratories at Natura, in RMIT and AgriBio in our department, and also commercial orchards. The project team is listed there, and we'll hear from two of those today, and Agriculture Victoria, Green Atlas, and Rubens Technologies. I won't go into this data, but we are looking at, they've done a lot of measurements last season on colour, size, and fruit quality and maturity. And I'm sure we'll see this graph in the next presentation. This heat map of fruit number, and it's done on a commercial orchard. Where to next? So this coming season, we're doing field calibrations, we're doing data analysis, obviously, and then the evaluation and road testing these sensors with commercial orchards.
Hi, everyone. There we go. So here I'm going to present briefly the results of the first season that we've done on the Food Agility CRC project with Agric and Summerfood Australia. And this was the assessment of the accuracy of the handheld spectrometer that we developed. The basic idea of this spectrometer is that you've got a single system that can be taken in the orchard. So it's a battery operated system. It works off a smartphone or a tablet, and it can take a scan of a fruit at the tree without picking it. And with a single scan, you get a whole range of parameters that might be of interest. And so what it changes is essentially a calibration model that has happened in the background. So that's how the scanner look like. So this sort of shroud here is in reality is a dark cover that is flexible, so it can wrap around branches and so on, so we can reach the fruit to be scanned, and then the scan in real time get the parameters of interest on your smartphone. So the spectrometer briefly works in different modalities, and so these are acquired in the same scan. So just by pushing a button, then you'll get all these scans taken. The data is in real time uploaded to servers, and through the prediction models that are on the server, then the result is returned on a smartphone. What we did, the project with the Food Agility this year, the past season, was about developing models for firmness and sugars and Brix, and try to also determine the occurrence of storage disorders in fruit. So there's two different experiments I'm going to talk about now. Okay, so the first one was done with Datura, and so that's there were 5 cultivars that were chosen for the experiment, and in all cases the fruit were scanned with Rubens, and then the destructive testing was done on the fruit, and so the conventional measurement of sugar firmness and eventually other parameters like the DA meter, the ethylene was also collected, and dry matter, and I believe all the other things like size and so on. So then after this was done, we developed machine learning models that takes essentially the spectra that Rubens acquires and trying to predict the value that the destructive testing was given. And so then we can, with that information, we can evaluate what is the accuracy. So for instance, here is an example done on, this is Snowflame 25, that's a white peach. So here in these graphs on the x-axis, you have the measured quantity done by the destructive testing, and on the y-axis you have what is predicted by the spectrometer. So you would like to have those data sitting nicely on the 45-degree lines. So that's then there is some scattering around that, and that's enables us to evaluate what is the accuracy. And so here we have within 5 to 10% values the error of the primary data. So, and then in this case we did model for all of those things. And here I see, for instance, the Brix, the firmness, and the ethylene. This was done on an average of 300 scans per cultivar. In this case here, the graphs were shown, the data were taken, the scans were done in the lab, but we also tested the scans done in the orchard. So for instance, here there was this September sun. These scans here, about 90 scans, were taken all in the field with Rubens, and then the fruit was picked and the destructive testing was done after that. And we do not see any decrease in accuracy because of that, and so we wanted to test these things, and to have a good test of working with the scanner in the orchard, and that was important. And the other experiment that was done was to use the scanner, the Rubens scan, to try and predict the occurrence of storage disorders. So this was a bit more complicated. So there was a number of fruits, and the scan was done at harvest. Then the fruits were put in cold storage for a variable number of weeks. And they were also then taken out of cold storage and left at room temperature for a variable number of days to simulate retail. And what we try to do is use the scan. In all those steps, the fruit was scanned as well. And at the end, they were visually assessed for any types of internal disorders like browning, mealiness, rubberiness also. So what we found is that if we scan a fruit, we have more than 90% accuracy. We can predict if that fruit at that moment will have a storage disorder. So if we, for instance, there is browning in there. Now, if instead of scanning at that moment, we use the scan that were taken earlier when the fruit was first taken out of cold storage, so we have still more than 80% accuracy in the occurrence of internal disorders in a few days. So by the time that the fruits, let's say 2 or 3 days after removal of cold storage. And then we did the same with the scan at harvest. So what happens? So in that case, we can use the scan at the moment in which the fruit is harvested to predict the likelihood of this fruit displaying some internal disorder in a few weeks' time. So after being through cold storage and eventually retail time. And so this was obviously, it's done only on a single cultivar. This was on the yellow, the O'Hare yellow peaches. So it probably needs a little bit more validation, but this data is very promising for what essentially trying to use the scanner to have a prediction in the future of the likelihood of all the quality of this fruit. Now, the last things I want to say is that we all these models were done on individual cultivars, but in some cases, it might be easier to actually deal just with generic models. For instance, here is a yellow nectarine or white peach or something like that, rather than having individual cultivar models. So in this case, there was some data from different types of different cultivars of yellow nectarine here listed here, and they were taken from different orchards. And in different places. In this case was Cobram Shepparton, and so indeed we can also generate models that are generic in the sense that, yes, you can see there's bricks and firmness for a yellow nectarine model. That's about it. I would like, if I have a few more minutes, actually just show a demo of how the system can work. I will share my screen where I have, I have here, is that visible? There is the screen of my tablet in there, and I have with me the prototype spectrometer. That's, I mean, it's probably visible in the small camera image. I have connected the scanner to my tablet, where there is the app in there that is visible. So that's connected to that device. And then I'll go on a scan tab. In this case, I haven't got stone fruit. I've got an apple here. So I'll select the apple Granny Smith over here. And I can start the scan. The app asked me to put some label in there. So for instance, I have, we can say it's a block 1 or something like that, a label. And then we scan the apple. That if you can see on my camera, that's how the apple's in the device. And then so get the scan in there. Now it's being scanned. And it takes a few minutes. Now the data is being transferred from the device via Bluetooth through the app. And through the server. Now the model is analyzing this data and returning a value for that is probably a bit small, but it's written there firmness and bricks value. In this case, these were the models that are available for this particular fruit. But then you can, if you have more models, say for instance you need ethylene, or you need a diameter, or you need a color, or whatnot, that can be just listed in there in one single scan. So that's the idea. So one can repeat the measurement a few times and get a few stats on the same on a block, for instance. And this can be a quick way to estimate the quality of the fruit. And this data is also available on a dashboard, so that you have all the spreadsheet of scans that have been taken and the values of firmness and Brix for the various fruits, so that can be easy to export, for instance, in Excel or something like that.
So what I'd like to talk about this afternoon is about what we do for the tree fruit industry. How it works and how it can potentially benefit you, and really focusing in on what we've been doing as part of the Food Agility Summer Fruit Project. Okay, so really as a company, we really try to focus in on this idea of providing growers with easy to use tools that really help them manage the quality yield outcomes for their orchard. So, in the cartoon graphic I've got here, it's really about getting, the right number of quality pieces of fruit on the tree, and not obviously not maxing out what you have. Now, I always think about this, and it's not too hard to imagine, how you can do this for a single tree. But when you really scale it up to the size of an orchard, it's it's an incredibly challenging problem. How do I make every tree this magical Goldilocks tree? Largely at the moment, typically growers are managing this by taking hand measurements, collecting only a tiny amount of data on what you actually have. And then there's an inbuilt assumption that you can extrapolate to the rest of the orchard. However, our experience and what you'll see through this talk is that it's very rarely the case that the orchard is uniformly distributed in any of the metrics that we measure. So we provide a ground-based platform that collects data on every single tree, typically several samples per tree, and we do that at a speed that's really unparalleled. Anywhere from driving up and down the rows from around 20 to 25 kilometers an hour in, say, a narrow row spacing, all the way up to 40 to 50 kilometers an hour in a wider row spacing. So really that's what we're trying to do, is get through your orchards very, very quickly and measure everything. And if we do this right, and we give growers the right kind of data at the right point in the season, really we want to be able to empower growers to manage every single tree in the orchard to become this Goldilocks tree. So there's a lot of benefits that you can potentially get out of precision management. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Top line, we're talking about, revenue increases by having more higher quality fruit. Bottom line really is about just optimizing what you have, whether it's labor, whether it's inputs, or other logistics, really just having a much longer range view of what's going to come out of the orchard. So the cartographer itself, which is the platform we use to gather this data, really it's the thing on the back of the ATV. We don't build ATVs. We have a couple of color cameras, very high resolution, that we use to take images of the tree. We also have a very high speed multi-beam LiDAR that's giving us more than 300,000 laser measurements per second. There's a custom lighting solution, which you'll see in a minute, is very, very important for us to get very high quality images all day, every day, and at nighttime. Typical operation with the power, runs off batteries. We can easily get a good shift in, 10 plus hours off a charge. So typically we'd run it during the day, charge it up overnight, and we're ready to go the next day. So it's also engineered to be highly reconfigurable. So we use it in many crops. I think we run commercially in about 16 different crops now. You can see on the right, our system's ready to go for an almond orchard. In the center there, it's completely reconfigured. All the same sensors, all the same processing, but completely reconfigured for kiwi fruit, where we've got a bottom-up looking system. And it's fast. So it works day or night. You can see on the right-hand side that we've taken daytime scan of an apple orchard and we've generated a fruit load map. In terms of repeatability, which was a question asked earlier, the nighttime scan is essentially indistinguishable from the daytime scan. And you can see that in the video there. The speed that the system is going right now is very typical in narrow row spacings. So in terms of the work we've been doing in summer fruit, it's very much been a close partnership with Green Atlas and AgVic. AgVic, I'd have to say, has done all the hard work here in terms of running the experiments and validating the cartographer and really keeping us honest. So all the results that say, this is how good it is are all independent validation coming out of AgVic. So you can see here a couple of the different experiments. We have done full commercial orchards, but we also do essentially patch-based experiments where we're running the system along zones and really just gathering a lot of information over small areas. But that information is then validated through ground truthing, either hand counts or independent measurements of things like size and color. You can see on the image on the left, there's even some artificial fruit there, which I think are just brightly colored tennis balls. Again, it's all about, ground truthing the data that we collect. And when we say it does a particular thing to a particular accuracy, having that, that suite of measurements there that says, yes, that's actually correct. So here are some examples that we've done with comparisons to caliper measurements in fruit sizing. And again, this is data that we're able to collect driving past at, in these orchards, probably 20 to 25 kilometers an hour as we drive past. And we're getting very, very close to ground truth. You can see the measurement there. The dotted line is 1-to-1, what you would get if we were absolutely perfect. The red line is a line of best fit, and the dots are essentially all the samples. Now that's all the data that we measured. It's also broken down by variety and training, and a bunch of other metrics, whether the fruit was measured up high in the canopy, whether it was measured down low in the canopy. And we get essentially the same results that, for the different cultivars, we essentially get, very, very good sizing estimates as we drive past. On the different training systems, we're also getting, very good estimates. Since we got these results, we've actually backed this up with our partners, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, in France and in Washington State, in the USA in particular. So we now have thousands and thousands and thousands of hand measurements that back up these results in other crops, like particularly in apples. In terms of color, again, we get fairly good distribution or fairly good line of best fit in terms of, do we match what an independent measurement of color says? We would never expect it to be perfect, given that we're subject to essentially the vagaries of ambient light. So we measure, not just the color of the light that we shine on the fruit, but there's also the effects of sunlight. Was it a cloudy day? Was it a sunny day? And so we're actually very pleased with these measurements. I think everything you see on this graph is taken during the daytime. We would expect the error to diminish at nighttime. And that's a series of experiments that we'll do going into next season, is what the cartographer results look like when we do nighttime scanning rather than the daytime scans. When we put this information together into a map, it looks something like you see on this slide. So you can see there are a couple of commercial blocks of plums and nectarines. I'm sure it's a little bit hard to tell in these figures the color variation, but I can assure you it is there. And we've actually developed a new tool recently to really highlight the color variation using the hue of the color. But you can see in the bottom, across a number of different fruits, so the left two images in that bottom panel are apples. So 3 months before harvest, we've got pink ladies that are very, very green. And then just before harvest, we've got, the bulk of them have developed the rosy glow that allows them to be sold as pink ladies, but not all of them have. And you can see there are bands in that image where they're largely still green apples. And then you can see, other results that we've got in commercial orchards with and on AgVix experimental properties in plums, nectarines, peaches, pears, and a different variety of plums there on the right. In some of the summer fruits, those colours are very closely related to fruit maturity. So one of the other things that we absolutely plan to look at, which you can only see there in the apples, but really is how those colours track over time, really so to give growers a better forward estimate in terms of when should they plan to harvest, but also when you look at the variability, which you can absolutely see in those bottom images, should I be doing a variable harvest? So should I harvest parts of my block earlier than other parts of the block? And that's information that we can absolutely provide by being able to show the geographic distribution. Now, I'm going to switch to yield estimation. So that's something else that we've done both on AgVix properties at Tatura and also in a couple of commercial farms. I always have this slide to talk about what's different when we do yield estimates. So normally we produce heat maps, and we can do that simply by driving up and down the orchards, and we give you a heat map. And the heat maps shows you essentially the relative yield of a block. But what it doesn't do is give you the absolute numbers. And the reason that that's true is because any image-based system, just like with a human being, can only see what it can see. So there is always some amount of fruit that is hidden, either behind leaves or behind other pieces of fruit. And if we want to go from a very precise system to a very accurate system, then we need to have some kind of calibration to take into account that ratio of hidden to visible. So we can produce calibrated maps at any point during the season. We've done it everything from flowers to fruitlets through to mature fruit. But typically mature fruit and yield estimation is really where we see calibration being important. And the way we get the ratio is by doing a small number of very targeted hand counts. We get a graph, something like you see on the right there, and that allows us to then apply that calibration factor to all of our numbers. And what it gives us is something like this. Excuse me. So this is a commercial orchard, October Sun plums. And we've done the calibration through a small number of hand counts. You can see there we've done it in 6 different zones. So on the graph on the left, you can see each of the data points. That's allowed us to calibrate the numbers that are in the map on the right. And that's what gives us the panel in the middle that allows us to say, on average, this is your yield per tree. When you hover over the map, you can see, in this area, this is the yield per tree. And you can extrapolate up to the full blocks. Our typical estimates in terms of accuracies, kind of across the board in all the fruits that we've been in, would be single-digit percentages. I think in the commercial orchards that we did, we got 2% in stone fruit, 2%, 6%. I think the worst might have been 10%. There were some caveats around that one. We've got a fantastic result came in this morning from the US. They've just harvested a block that we predicted 2 weeks ago, and we were 1.5% out. So typically we're single digit percentages. So we're pretty pleased with how well our prediction estimates work across the board. So something else we do, this is not really part of the project, but you know, it's nice to show, you know, other things that we do with the cartographer. And again, AgVic is involved in some ground truthing on some of these measurements as well. But because we carry a LiDAR, we can also do estimates of things like canopy volumes, canopy cross-sectional areas, canopy density, and canopy heights. And you can see those are all represented in the kind of cartoon figures that we have on the right of the image. And again, just like the other measures, you know, we have those as layers in our maps. And so you can see, well, what's the variability in terms of canopy area? And in this case, you can see, you know, northwest corner, there's some large canopy area, and that's the example in the top right. And you can see distributed everywhere else are kind of average canopy areas, and the yellow are low canopy areas. So an average canopy area is the example on the bottom right. And that gives people, if you like, good targets for things like, you know, how should I be calculating spray volumes? Things like, you know, should I be doing targeted pruning in just some sections of my orchard? On that last point, here's an example that we did with FarmCloud in the US. They've taken a canopy map that we produced, turned it into zones, which you can see on the left. Those zones were then used for doing targeted pruning activities with a view to creating uniformity across the block. Now, they didn't perfectly execute the plan, but you can see on the right, once they've done the pruning and then we've rescanned, they've actually got it very, very close to uniform. So they've done very, very well just by using that map on the left. One of the other things that we have moved into as a company, using the kind of data that we have both at flower stage and early fruit onset, so primary and secondary thinning in particular, is looking at the use of variable rate spray. So again, we take our maps that we produce to very, very high resolution, and we turn them into zone maps, plug those into a variable rate spray system or variable rate spreader, as the case may be. And we've just started executing, if you like, plans based on that. So we've done trials now with Wartic. You can see a little panel in the bottom right. So, you know, that screen grab of their controller in a tractor is real. That's just a photograph of the system in operation, and it's of this exact block in the orchard. And then we've gone through and sprayed that. In this particular case, they scanned at flower stage to get a flower load map, but then they've sprayed at fruit onset to do thinning. Our partners in New Zealand are now taking this same system, and they'll be rolling out that out commercially over the coming season. So I'll have a lot of learnings there, I'm sure. So there's a lot of benefits. Again, I'm sure I'm going to be preaching to the choir on why you would do variable rate, but this is really when, you know, the maps that we produce, which is really just data, right? It's when you're able to action that data and really start to say, you know, I'm you know, targeting individual trees or individual groups of trees and getting the benefits that come from really managing at that precision level. You know, so volume of sprays is kind of a key one. You know, there's significant cost savings just in knowing that, you know, there's no tree up high and don't spray it, versus, you know, or there's a dead tree, don't spray there, or, you know, don't spray in the headlands and turning off very precisely. But beyond that, obviously we want to save costs, particularly when it comes to manual thinning, spraying at the flower stage, and trying to get a much more optimal fruit load at the thinning stage, so that the thinning crews can spend less time per tree and you get them through much more rapidly. And that's really, if you like, the cost savings that that we're trying to target as Green Atlas. Wrong way. So hopefully I've described, our mission as a company. It's really about, managing orchards at the tree level as best we can and trying to give, the best tools possible that we can to assist with that.
I want to quickly show you where you can find a lot of the information that's been presented today, and some of the locations where that information will be presented are on the Horticulture Industry Network website. If you're not aware of this, information on newsletters gets sent out with links to this particular website. I'll quickly show that newsletter as well. So it's profitable stone fruit research. All the research is under tabs, so production research, so looking at production in your orchard, improving those outcomes in your orchard. We'll jump over to harvest and post-harvest management, where there's information, and you'll see Ruben's technologies here, looking at the prototype that he's been working on. We'll update that after today. And there's also some work that's happening in the supply chain area as well that I'll be talking about next week. Just back on the production research side of things, we'll go into the rootstocks information that was presented today by Dr. Mark O'Connell. And it's got things like grower protocols that you can look at and the results that Mark's been showing. This will also be updated with what you saw today. And just very quickly, if you want to look at the orchard, just see what it actually looks like and you haven't had a chance to be there. This is a virtual tour. I'll be very quick. You can look around the orchard here. So this was back in February 2020, just before everything went a bit crazy, looking at peaches. So this is the peach September sun, and we can go and have a look at what the actual tree looks like. So just quickly, Cattleman rootstock. This is the Profitable Stone Fruit newsletter, which I hope most of you are receiving. If not, information is also sent by Trevor Ranford from Summer Fruit Australia. And last slide, just a quick thank you to all our supporters, people that the businesses that fund this sort of work, and a shout out to Horticulture Innovation Australia. I've been talking with Adrian Englefield just recently. He just asked me to show you who the members are that you can get in contact with. Their original extension team, and you can discuss anything Hort Innovation.